From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Coming up today, two of the featured speakers at K-State's Swine Profitability Conference yesterday. From Seaboard Foods, Gary Lewis shares his view of the dynamics that will most greatly influence the pork industry over the next few years. Also, Ben Woolley of Sunterra Farms talks about making the transition to antibiotic-free pork production and marketing. Also today, K-State's Ignacio Ciampitti will talk about some of the corn production questions on the minds of producers as expressed at the recent series of K-State corn production schools around the state. And further ahead, with his weekly commentary on rural Kansas, K-State's Gus Vander Hoeven, plus more, here on Agriculture Today. Agricultural producers, landowners, and creditors, you have a partner in your legal and financial needs. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services offers reliable, trusted information and guidance. Whether you need advice for ag credit concerns or are transitioning your operation to the next owner, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services can assist you in making sound decisions for your business. To learn more, call 800-321-3276 or visit us online. You're listening to Agriculture Today. The Animal Sciences and Industry Department here at K-State welcomed another large crowd of hog producers and other pork industry folk in yesterday for the annual Swine Profitability Conference. And this year's program featured several contemporary and diverse topics and presenters. Opening the afternoon session yesterday was the Executive Vice President of Seaboard Foods, which is among the largest pork production and processing operations in the country. Gary Lewis has been with Seaboard since 1999. Its operation consists of 336,000 sows and processing plants in Guymon, Oklahoma, and now is a partner in the new plant in Sioux City, Iowa. Gary was brought in to talk about leading trends impacting the pork industry at present, and it starts, he says, with the boom in pork processing capacity.
You know, it's really driven from one key component of it that's changing in the industry, and that is the amount of shackle space. Here, between last year and the next year, we're looking at increasing the pork processing capacity by 14% with new processing plants. And then we could have another anywhere from probably 2 to maybe as much as 7 or 8% increased pork processing capacity with the proposed pork slaughter inspection rule that's out there on comment currently, or the Modernization Act. Short term, there's going to be some overcapacity, but like any business or industry that's allowed to just operate with the normal economics, it will be a matter of time and things will right size. I mean, there could be potentially more expansion than we expect in the sow herd, or there could be potentially some older, less efficient pork processing plants that might idle.
You also addressed that very point, whether sow herd expansion will be a likelihood, and it sounded as if you think that is where the direction will be.
Yeah, a lot of it's going to depend on, how the forward economics look. Obviously, expanding sow herd is a very capital-intensive project, and both producers and the lending institutions are going to have a lot of confidence to keep that moving forward. And so the economics will be the best predictor of where this ultimately goes.
With capacity being substantial, that's been swelling over the years, with sow herd expansion occurring, the industry, you think, then will be more dynamic. Could you explain that? That was part of your presentation also.
Yeah, the dynamics are really driven by supply and demand, both for the live producer and for the pork processing plants. I just feel with all the change that we have coming, where the profits will be shifting, obviously with what we have in the near term, it'll be shifting back towards the producer more. But then a few things could change very quickly that could reverse that trend. So I just feel like there's going to be a lot of sorting out that needs to occur in the industry, and that's going to probably keep things fairly dynamic going forward.
And the dynamics include demand for the product, and that's both here and abroad. You stressed again in your presentation, maintaining strong exports is imperative to this industry.
Yeah, if you look back in 2000, I think we were about 2% of our pork was exported. And now we're looking at, after these plants go in and the sow expansion, we're going to need to have anywhere between 25% up to 32% of our pork exported, depending on what we're able to do with domestic consumption of pork. 25% would be assuming that we really need some fairly significant increases in domestic consumption.
And you did offer some thoughts along that latter line, that domestic consumption has to be maintained, if not bolstered. And what can the pork industry and pork producer groups do to assure that?
I think the biggest thing for the domestic market right now is we need to, as leaders in the industry, get together, coordinate on the messaging that we're doing, where instead of trying to market pork through fear and confusion, we really need to market the pork through more of a benefits of pork and a consistent message coming from all segments of the industry.
Maybe easier said than done?
Absolutely. There's a lot of meetings that go on every week regarding this, and it is always tough to get people to coordinate in the efforts when they have the opportunity to do a niche sale on some type of information that gives them a short-term advantage.
All of that said, more or less the message in sum is that the industry should not rest on its laurels, although once more it's in pretty good territory right now.
Yeah, it's actually, you look out this next year, it's looking very, very positive. There's so many things that can change overnight in this industry to take a lot of the concerns I mentioned away. Who knows what issues could change that could increase our demand very rapidly.
But in any event, it's been a nice rebound since the tougher days, PEDV being the centerpiece of that.
Yes. No, we've had a number of fairly solid years from an integrated perspective on pork profitability. And while it swings from the live producers to the plants, when you look at the full integrated business, it has been a very good business to be in.
That's the Executive Vice President of Seaboard Foods, Gary Lewis. Also on the Swine Profitability Conference program yesterday, the operators of Sunterra Farms, which is headquartered in Alberta, Canada, but which produces hogs in our northern plains. That operation is committed in large part now to producing and marketing antibiotic-free pork. And with regulatory changes impacting the use of antibiotics in hog production, this farm's story draws extra attention. One of the managing partners is Ben Woolley.
So we've got sow units in Alberta and Ontario, and we finish about 350,000 pigs a year in South Dakota. Of those, about 80% of them go into an antibiotic-free program that we market the pigs through.
When did you make the shift to antibiotic-free, and was it as a result of regulatory changes?
It was more of a marketing opportunity than anything else, and we made the decision to go into it so long as we could do it without compromising the welfare of our production, of our pigs, and the animals under our care. And we started it about 18 months ago, and we've been getting better at it ever since, and learning to manage production without the use of antibiotics, and it's had its challenges, but we feel like we're well on the way to doing it about as well as we possibly can now.
Briefly here, as you addressed in your presentation, what are those prime challenges? Obviously, the objective is to maintain healthy pigs. So what things have you had to overcome to achieve that?
Oh, such things as there's a lot more labor involved, obviously, because you have to individually treat animals and they have to be tagged and removed from the pens when they're treated. There's no blanket medication that you use in antibiotic-free production, so retraining our people to take much more care and attention to individual animals is a big learning curve. And then also on the other side, on the flip side of that is some of the producers think because it's antibiotic-free that they can't use antibiotics ever. So you have to train those guys to that yes, you can treat pigs and you should treat pigs just like you do normally. It's just that you're individually treating them rather than population treatments.
So you were able to overcome those labor-intensive challenges, it sounds.
That's correct, yeah. It was a learning curve, but yeah, we've been able to overcome those.
What were the opportunities presented for you then as far as converting over to antibiotic-free, or in this case, selective antibiotic use?
Well, there's the obvious marketing opportunities that we have to be able to get a premium on the pigs that we're marketing. But quite apart from that, we feel like it made us better producers because it allowed us to change the way that we look at our animals under our care and to really, really focus on the details of pig production and individual pig treatment.
As far as economic efficiency of the operation, though, it sounds as if this change has gone smoothly and beneficially for the operation.
Yeah, it's been a challenge. It's taken us a while to learn to do it, but obviously we're still at it, so it's got its benefits.
What recommendations directly would you have for a producer who would be entertaining the idea of going down this path then?
Yeah, isolation, health, and biosecurity are the three things that you need to really, really focus on, and it's a whole different ball game when you go down the antibiotic-free route, and it's a huge, very steep learning curve, and you better have a really good relationship with your veterinary staff and your veterinary consultants because they become a real key in this process.
And what's next? You'll continue to refine the system? That's the next goal for your operation?
Yeah, we'll continue to refine the system, continue to market the pigs, and we're now participating all the way through to the end consumer on this production. So that's going to be the next step, and we're headed down that route. So, yeah, we'll continue to refine it, continue to get better at it, and continue to learn.
That's Ben Woolley of Sunterra Farms on the opportunities and pitfalls of producing antibiotic-free pork. That subject among the highlights at the 2018 Swine Profitability Conference here yesterday on the Kansas State University campus. We'll have more shortly. This is Agriculture Today.
Agriculture and food systems are the main drivers of the Kansas economy, but must be improved in order to feed the world's growing population. How are we going to do so? Reduce food loss, find ways to preserve grasslands, and help families stretch their dollars. Global food systems is one of the 5 grand challenges K-State Research and Extension is addressing. To learn more, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
This Agriculture Today continues now with a return look at corn production from 2 vantage points, one being that K-State has just updated a publication that's been highly useful to corn growers for many a year, the Corn Management Publication, and we want to address those updates and what they will have to offer for you producers. But before that, we want to also find out what's been on you producers' minds as you've been taking part in the recent series of corn production schools that K-State Research and Extension has been conducting throughout Kansas. We've brought by once more crop production specialist Ignacio Ciampitti, K-State Research and Extension. And Ignacio, you had a grand opportunity to interact with corn growers out there over the last 3-4 weeks or so at these schools, and you probably picked up a few thoughts and bits of input from those folks, didn't you?
Yeah. Again, as always, Eric, thanks for the invitation and for the chance to speak with you and our farmers. Yes, we have an excellent audience in many of our schools. We have total 3 large schools across the state, and then we have 2 kind of a pre-planned schools on corn. Very exciting times still, challenging for 2018 when you start discussing about economics. It's always getting involved. Right. And I think that's one of still our key points for moving forward is really how we can intensify systems in a sustainable and profitable way. And I think that one of the key factors, discussed in the schools between many, many other topics was, looking at economics and looking at how we can improve production cost. When we are looking about cutting back in inputs, how we can do it very wisely. When you're looking about seeding rates, that's one of our main costs on production in corn. So we started discussing about seeding rates and asking farmers to start looking at environments or zones, see if they can fine-tune seeding rates based on different areas of the field. that they might have different optimal seeding rate. And with that, we provide examples of coming from our on-farm research studies with them. We are very fortunate to have on-farm research every year, working in collaboration with farmers to demonstrate basically the value of some of the research that we're conducting. And then seeding rate is specifically one of the most attractive practices. Also row spacing. I mean, some people start looking at 15 inches or narrow row corn just with the goal even of improving weed control. And I think that that's another factor that is always almost a number one topic for every farmer. I would say corn, soybean, sorghum farmer is weed control. And I think that the key for us is really to look at long-term practices that can help us to work around the weeds.
When we come back to variable seeding rates within a field in the zones as you talk of, producer responds to that. It may be quite a shift in their approach, and it takes a little more intensive management.
Well, we try to make sure that we share very simple concepts because, in fact, many times, producers are afraid of, will this imply buying a new equipment, making a new investment, risking too much of money on this? And we try to show them that there are different approaches to start looking at variable seeding rate. And one of the approaches that we work with many farmers is basically trying to look what is the variability that I have in my field. And then once we understand the variability, look at can we work in 2 or 3 zones. And the way we work in those zones is many times in your fields, you will have variability that might be related to pH, nutrient issues, compaction, soil texture. So there will be many factors influencing the variability. And you might have in an area of a field a very low yielding area, 20, 30 acres. And we have those situations in many farmer fields, 70, 80 bushels per acre. And areas of the field that are high-yielding areas with 150 and 160 bushels. So imagine that the level of inputs that farmers should be investing on those 2 areas are quite different, quite unique. The challenge is for them to identify the areas, and once they identify those areas, to start thinking about, okay, how can I start allocating resources in a differential way, but also to make sure that you are still investing on the best production where you might get a much return, and then making sure that you don't give up on the areas that are really poor in terms of a yield production.
This approach applies as well to fertility management, obviously.
This approach, in fact, applies to many different practices because what you're looking at the end of the day is your maximum yield. What is the maximum yield that you can achieve in each of the different areas of the field? And just by looking at seeding rates, we were able to quantify in many locations, savings of $5 to $10 per acre. On seeding rates alone, then you start thinking about, as you mentioned, fertility, because different yield potential, if you have lower yield potential, it requires less nutrients. So fertility savings, and then start thinking about any other type of savings that sustain high yields. Mm-hmm. So I think that benefits, and farmers were able to see by first hand some of these benefits. And I think that for the first time also there were many farmers seeing that this doesn't imply buying this high-cost equipment and high investment. First strategy is to make sure that you know what you're doing, trying to identify variability, and then taking firm steps into moving into variable rate. I like the idea of not jumping immediately into a precision ag, variable rate investment, high risk, if I don't have a farmer understanding basically or knowing, okay, is something that really I will be able to recover that investment. And I think that was one of the main topics in our schools is also looking at return of investment of many practices. Another topic that we discussed, very interesting for many farmers, was sections of the field that we double plant when we are planting close to the headlines and in some of those discussions we quantify, in one of the studies that we have 5% areas of the fields in 1,000 acres, for example, that's not a small number, okay? And then the yield loss on that, because it's not only that you are double planting, but also what is the yield economically and agronomically yield loss when you are double planting, dumping twice the amount of seed that you need.
And that's more substantial than producers would normally think, you say.
When they start looking at those outcomes from our reports, they start realizing that there's some level of technology that today is almost no-brainer. This type of technology, for example, is something that is already coming on planters. It's called automatic section control. Planters will shut on and off based on double planting. it can save a lot of money. In corn specifically, our research shows that the savings are coming because we reduce the impact on losing yield. So, for example, in a 150 bushel environment, we usually tend to lose 20% of the yields if we are double planting.
That's a notable number.
That's a large number. In a high-yielding environment, when you are talking about 250 or high-yielding studies, usually the yields reductions are very minimum because plants are able to compensate and they have resources. But I still think about the losses that you have, for dumping extra double cost of seed. Again, how we can become more productive, more efficient, and how we can probably recover our investment in many of our things.
Several things to ponder as corn planting season is but a couple of months away now. And that leads us to let folks know about the updated corn management guide from K-State. You collaborated with several of your associates here at the university to work up this, not a new publication, but now a revised publication, basically, Ignacio.
So what we want to do is like every November, December, we kind of look at this publication and start thinking about what are the topics that are coming for the next year. What are the things that our farmers will be looking for the next planting season? And we wanted to make sure that we have a publication so we can address the main specific topics related to this: seeding rates, row spacing, tillage rotation. And then we go from there to other topics like, weed control, soil fertility, and then we have irrigation. And last year, adding a section on machinery. Also, we have some very interesting research studies looking at the rate of dry down, how quickly the corn that is approaching at the end of the season is drying down, and really trying to understand basically how the farmers are able to maximize the volume that they are selling based on that. Because we have several situations, farmers selling corn with low moisture content. We start putting numbers to that and asking them to realize that in many situations, if we are not timely, we are losing money. Mm-hmm. So we are losing water, we are losing money. In terms of our nutrient, we also very good information, even in application of different rates of nutrients and also exploring the idea of applying late season nitrogen, going to application of nitrogen close to flowering. Good research, new research coming from Dr. Ruiz Diaz, looking at late applications, so how it's impacting, and also trying to look for different rates, not only the optimal rate, but trying to see if we can explore lower rates. Mm-hmm. And in some situations, we're seeing that lower rates still we are able to sustain yields. So that's another factor that is looking for farmers how they can still not cut everything back, but make sure that they work around the optimal and trying to reduce some of the input cost.
And you can get a hold of that publication as simply as going to the K-State Research and Extension Bookstore website. That is bookstore.ksre.ksu.edu. Click on publications there, and you can access it right there online. That's the quickest way to do so. If you'd rather, you can inquire as well through your local extension office. The updated corn management publication from K-State Research and Extension. Well, Ignacio, you've more crop production schools to go yet this winter, so good luck on finishing out that circuit, and we will have you back soon. Appreciate your time here.
Thanks, Eric.
He is Ignacio Ciampitti, crop production specialist with K-State Research and Extension, and we'll return after these moments away on Agriculture Today. For 25 years, K-State Research and Extension's Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services has been providing a no-cost, confidential place to call in and visit with an agricultural lawyer. Our experts are available to help you producers handle legal and financial issues. Explore your options and generate solutions. Call us at 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. Stop, look, and listen. This is our state, Kansas.
When I visited the acreage, we drove across it in the four-wheeler and we looked at what they thought might be a good place to build.
That's Gus Vander Hoeven of Kansas State University with comment on life in rural Kansas.
They built their house where a house had never stood before. There were no streets going north, east, south, west. Yes, there was the county road going north, south. and their fence line followed that road for the distance. They owned the land on which they built. The county road dipped from the top of the Flint Hills to where a small draw flowed with water. That stream had created a small valley on the property, which I assume was one reason the acreage had attracted them when it came up for sale. All 80 acres of it. It was part of the Flint Hills. It was upland and a draw with a creek, bordered with trees as the creek meandered along the low meadow protected by trees. It was an interesting piece of land, but where to build? The builder whom I know well and whom I had worked with before called me and asked if I would look the property over and help with locating the best home site. Like I said, there was no old home site, no old foundation. When I visited the acreage, we drove across it in the four-wheeler, and I looked at what they thought might be a good place to build. They seemed to have fallen for the meadow. The trouble was, it was low and sheltered, but would be hot, and if ever there was a heavy rain, it would flood. My advice was not to build along or on the meadow. The other thing to keep in mind is the access to the county road. Convenience is something experienced daily, unless one is a recluse, and that they are not. After looking at all options, I selected a general location with a further study, and I confirmed and suggested they look at it. To help them visualize the site, we set poles and flags, which showed where the corners of the house would be. I had studied the house plan, which was basically what they wanted, with some changes. None of the changes would make much of a difference in my selection of the site. In my selection, I had left the meadow untouched, except I used it as a foreground focal point to look at from the covered deck along the back of the house on the second floor. That became a vantage point. The wooded creek ran along the back of the valley at the foot of the hills. They accepted my argument and reason for building on the site I selected and made a few adjustments to the house plan to really make the most of this acreage. In the meantime, I had Googled their property, and after printing and enlarging it, I drew in the house, the driveway, future shed, and indicated the surface water flow and drainage away from the house. When the bulldozer rumbled forward to take its first bite to dig out the walkout basement, it dug into virgin soil, Kansas soil, old soil, and rock deposited over time. Time, which is sometimes very difficult for us to comprehend. But one thing was sure, no house had ever stood there before. Sure, their meadow and creek were no Grand Canyon, but time and natural erosion had created the site. Whenever I have been involved in siting a house, what should become a home, with the outbuildings, I've always felt responsibility, not only to the people who would be living there, but also to the land. If you listen, land will tell you if something is good. A building is an imposition on the land, and it should be in harmony. And future landscaping should not cover up for mistakes, but further enhance and help with the transition. The house they built was not a small house, but it and the outbuildings suit the site, and I think they are happy. When I drew up the conceptual plan and later a landscape plan, I looked beyond the immediate surroundings of the house. Remember, they have 80 acres. On that acreage were hilltops, and in another draw was a large farm pond. As I studied the land, I saw potential to get out of the house and go to the hills, enjoy the Flint Hills, or that part of it they owned. From the house, I marked on paper a trail which followed the edge of the meadow, then crossed the creek through the woods, then climbing out of the woods up the slope, it reached the flat top of the hills. The hill I selected ran like a peninsula, an outstretched arm on the west side of the pond. There, on the top, I drew a large fire pit built of native stone. The house the young people built has now celebrated several Christmas seasons, so it is lived in. Their young children are growing up. The children are now at the age that family adventures are still real adventures. I hope they've built the fire pit on top of that hill as I suggested. I can see the family at dusk leaving the house, walking the trail through the darkening woods, up the hills, following the mowed trail. Once on top, they've reached the open sky and all the stars, and maybe a full moon. There are the Big Dipper and the Small Dipper. At the tip of the Little Dipper is the North Star. It has guided people for ages across the seas and prairies. As the fire burns with good wood, it spreads its warmth and glow, as only an outdoor fire can do. Voices whisper as the owl calls and coyotes yip in the distance. That is how we teach our children to love the land. That is why we live in the country.
Gus Vander Hoeven of Kansas State University with his weekly commentary on rural Kansas. Our time's away for today. Thanks for tuning in. Eric Atkinson here. This has been Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.